Hey, all you Gretas and Shutezcats out there. Welcome to APES Notes, Unit 2, Section 1, Intro to Biodiversity. So here's a nifty little graphic of all of Earth's land mammals by weight. So here's all the humans on the planet, and look, way more cows than us. They could take over if they wanted to. So you can see different pets, livestock, dogs, cats are in here somewhere, pigs, goats, sheep. Wild animals make up a very teeny part of what's out there. It's mostly industrialized agriculture, which we will talk multiple times about this year. All right, so in your notes, page 1, biodiversity is the variety of life on Earth. And generally speaking, the higher the biodiversity is, the more stable that ecosystem is. So that's what we're going to be talking about in these notes. So 3 scales, down a little bit, I'll sit up. 3 scales of biodiversity. The first one is genetic diversity. So this is genetic variation among individuals in a population. Population is going to be all one species. So here's a nice easy map of indigenous skin colors. So really simply, the closer you are to the equator, or your ancestors were to the equator, the darker your skin is. And the further away from the equator and the less direct sunlight you get, the paler your skin is, for the main reason of making vitamin D. When you have less sun, you need to be able to absorb more of the sun's rays to be able to make that vitamin D to not be sick. So the paler areas with less sun needed paler skin to absorb that to make vitamin D. Next, here we go. Environmental stressors. So we've got multiple kinds of environmental stressors. We can have things like physical stress to an environment, like a natural disaster, hurricane, tornado, whatnot. We can have wildfires. Think California, the Amazon, still on fire. Pollution, thermal stress, too hot. Climate change is part of this. Sometimes our summers are getting too hot for the things in it to be as healthy and productive as they could be. Radiation, Bruce Banner will tell you, not always a good thing. Different climatic things like light or temperature can be a stressor as well. And then biological predation, competition, parasites, lack of mates. I was like, there's another word in there. Lack of mates. So if you don't have anyone to make babies with, that's definitely a stressor. So, on your own. So there's a couple questions that said, what would enable a population to bounce back more easily or have more resilience after an environmental stress or disturbance, to have high genetic diversity or low genetic diversity, and explain why on your paper. So that's on the bottom of page 1. So pause, think about that, write it down, and then unpause. Okay, did you unpause? So the more genetically diverse you are, the better you're going to be able to bounce back from something. Even something as simple as a bacteria population in an antibiotic, if they are more diverse, then some of them may be resistant to that antibiotic. If you have a lot of different kind of plants in an area, then some of them might be able to handle the warmer temperatures of climate change. If you have a bunch of different kind of animals, maybe some of them will survive the harsher winters or the hotter summers, whatever. So the greater diversity you have, the easier it is for something in that population to survive and then continue on. All right, bottleneck effect, which is on page 2. This is a drastic and sudden reduction in the size of a population that leads to change in the gene pool. Let's move me up here. Ooh, I'm at the top now. So here's your original population, and here is the bottleneck effect. So just a little bit of it comes out. But if this is your surviving population, and now these are who is reproducing and moving on, this is going to be your new population. So it just was a random something that happened. Something major happens, crazy reduction in the size of the population, but major change in the gene pool from this original to this new population. So think of a natural disaster could cause this. And I think that's the next question. Oh, it's the next question on your paper. It says, what could cause bottlenecks? So any natural disaster, a tornado could wipe out an area. The example I usually give in class is if the ceiling caves in and takes out like half the class. And sometimes it takes out most of our males, or it takes out a certain ethnicity that's represented in that class. So it's a random something that happens, usually some type of natural disaster or accident of some type that is just going to wipe out a whole bunch of stuff. All right, species diversity is the next thing. The number of species in a region or habitat, which would be in a community or an ecosystem. So how many different kinds of species? So first we were looking at diversity within a population, and now within all of the populations, how many different kinds of species do we have? Do we have just one or two kind of bugs, or do we have a whole bunch? Here in Indiana, you could probably get 10, 15 different kinds of bugs in one tree, but if you're down in the Amazon rainforest, you can get up to 1,000 different types of bugs in one tree, which I think is amazing. So a species, definition, can interbreed and produce viable offspring. So the question that says, what is a species? If you have forgotten, let's move me back down here. So here is all the stuff on the planet. We have bugs, we have plants, we have algae, we have protozoa, fungi, Monera, ooh, that's dated, bacteria, let's go with bacteria, viruses are teeny, teeny, tiny, other animals, bugs, if they decided to take over the world, would totally win. So go ahead and pause and make guesses on those next couple questions, just because it's kind of fun to see what you guys would think versus what the actual answers are. So the questions are, how many different species do you think are identified and classified by scientists? And then estimate the actual total number on Earth. What do you think is the most common species that we think is out there? And then guess the most common animal and the most common organism. So let's see what you guys pause. Okay, hopefully you paused and did it. So we have identified and cataloged 2 million different species. Pretty cool. Estimates are closer to anywhere between 5 and 100 million different species on this Earth, with the most common estimate being about 10 million. So we have a lot left to discover, and you guys might discover it. And if you discover it, you get to name it anything you want. Now, what is the most common animal on Earth? These little dudes. So the nematode roundworm is the most abundant of all animals. 4 out of every 5 animals are nematode worms. If all solid materials except nematode worms were to be eliminated, you could still see the outline of most of it in nematode worms. Little creepy crawlies, they're all over the place. Anytime you see like fruit rotting, nematodes are in there. So you've totally eaten these little guys. Most common organism is bacterium, this little guy. 1/3 of all single-celled ocean organisms is this kind of bacteria. So, ew. So that is that. The next 2 questions say the species diversity of a region is considered a critical environmental indicator. So think about the whys. Why would you want, if you were comparing an area that had a lot of diversity to an area of low diversity, why would that indicate an issue possibly with the environment? And then the second thing, it says, what impact would habitat loss have on animals with large or small territories? So the less critters you have in an area, less species you have, once again, the lower the diversity, the lower the stability is. So if you only have a few things living in an area, it's going to be much easier for that area to be devoid of life pretty quickly if something happens. The greater your diversity is, the greater chances something will survive. And then if you have animals with a very large habitat and then they lose half of it due to habitat loss, they need those territories for mating or hunting or whatever, and so then their chances of survival go down as well. All right, number 3 talks about, so your textbook will say ecosystem, the AP people might say habitat, same thing. Habitat or ecosystem diversity is the variety of habitats that exist within a given region. So check out California. They've got like everything. Field trip, guys. But California's got a ton of different habitats or ecosystems or biomes, whichever way you want to go with these things. Definitely much more specific than the biomes we talked about last unit. So We have two kinds of species. We can have what is called a generalist species, and these can live under a wide range of biotic and abiotic conditions. So think rats, raccoons, things that can live lots of places, can eat lots of things, your average teenage male, but anyone that can have a wide range of these situations and still survive, versus a specialist species that tend to be adorable. Not really. Specialist species live under a very narrow range of conditions or feed on one or a very small group of species. So if you only eat bamboo, or you only eat eucalyptus, or you have to live in the water because if you don't, you will dry out and die. So these are more specialist species. If you lose the one thing they need, they're gone. So, question says, what impact would habitat loss have on these two categories of species? Well, what do you think? Oh no, look, he fell down. Isn't that funny? So these guys are adorable, but not, we got to take care of them because they fall down. If you're ever having a bad day, just look up pandas on YouTube and you'll be in a better place pretty soon. So, answer in your packets. What impact would habitat loss have on these two categories of species? Which group is in much more danger of extinction? Can you think of a reason why it might be advantageous to be a specialist? And what impact would habitat loss have on animals with large or small territories? So go ahead and pause and think about those questions. Okay, hopefully you paused and answered the questions. So habitat loss, if they happened on the generalist species, they probably could move somewhere else. But if habitat loss happened to a specialist species, they might not have anywhere else they can move and they could die out. So obviously the specialist is in much more danger of extinction because if you lose their one thing, they're out of options. A reason why it might be advantageous to be a specialist, well, maybe there's an abundance of whatever they have. And so then they're happy in their little place and they've got everything they need right there. What impact would habitat loss have on animals with large or small territories? Same thing as before. If you have a large territory and you're losing some of it, that's going to impact you negatively. And if you only have a small territory and that is lost, now you have nothing. So definitely have negative impacts to both of those things. All right, now we're going into what is called biodiversity indices, or plural of index. This is the measure of biodiversity that's going to take into account both species richness and species evenness. So let's get those two words defined. So richness is the total number of species. So if there are 5 different species somewhere, the richness is 5. It's just the number of species. Nice and easy. Species evenness is the abundance of individuals within each species. So maybe you have 100 humans and like 2 dogs and 1 cat. So the richness would be 3, but the evenness would be very much off because you have a lot of humans and not a lot of the other stuff. So you want an area for true diversity. You want an area that both has a high richness and high evenness. So a lot of critters and about the same amount of each one. So which forest is more diverse? Community 1 has 4 species that are 25% each, so they each make up a quarter of the population. Community 2 still has 4 species, so they have species richness, but they don't have the species evenness because there's way more A's than anything else. So, hey, what I just said. They have the same 4 trees, so same richness, but they differ in evenness. So if you saw a test question like this is the much more diverse. Because let's say something happens and wipes out species A. This forest will be able to recover. This forest, maybe not, because most of those trees would be gone. So let's say these are all ashes and the emerald ash borer comes in. This forest can reproduce, can fill in those areas. This forest is gone. So everybody who lived in that forest now needs to move on. All right, how about this one? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. But community A, the abundance of one species, the yellow, is high relative to the others. So this is a low species evenness versus this one. They have the same abundance, so this has a high species evenness. So you want high richness and high evenness. Now, we are not going to do this in class. because you will never have to do this on a test. But there are two different ways that you can measure species diversity. You can use the Shannon-Weiner diversity function. I'm never going to make you do this math. Or you can use the Simpsons diversity index, not these Simpsons, but Simpsons. And it's looking at the number of species and the richness and evenness of them. So what I would know from these notes is what is species richness, what is species evenness, and know that you can use the Shannon-Weiner or the Simpsons diversity index to look at species richness or evenness and come to conclusions about the diversity of that ecosystem. But you will not have to actually calculate them yourselves, because I'm not that mean to you. All right, you have survived these notes. So I want to take this opportunity to let each and every one of you guys know that you are good enough, you are smart enough, and people do like you. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good God, do your homework.